Transnational and Domestic Crime, an Inside Look at Human Sex Trafficking by Ashley Hansen. The global context, human sex trafficking. Transnational crime refers to organized criminal activity that crosses one or more national boundaries for the purpose of obtaining power, influence, monetary, and/or commercial gains through a pattern of corruption and/or violence. Despite common misconceptions, to constitute human trafficking, a victim need not be transported from one location to another. Although human sex trafficking is often thought of as something that exists outside the United States, it is estimated that 100,000 children annually are sexually exploited. This is important to note because a lot of people in America do think that human sex trafficking only derives in other countries or in undeveloped countries. And this is a huge misconception. It is happening in our local neighborhoods. And just to give the example, like Riverside, Moreno Valley, Paris, these are all hotspots for human sex trafficking of children. Commercially sexually exploited children, also known as CSEC. According to federal law, severe forms of trafficking in persons include sex trafficking, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age, or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Is this a social problem? Absolutely. As the problem of human trafficking has been defined more clearly, estimates of human trafficking victims have increased from approximately 600,000 individuals trafficked worldwide in 2005 to 20.9 million victims worldwide in 2012. Specifically, the number of victims trafficked into the United States annually is estimated to be between 14,500 and 17,500. Increasing attention can also be seen in the rise of federal U.S. human trafficking cases brought forth for prosecution. The number escalated from 10 in 2001 to 128 in 2012. During fiscal year 2014, the Department of Justice convicted 157 sex traffickers. Furthermore, we can see the true escalation of these crimes against children, which are indeed a social problem when we compare the progression of this crime over time. In 2005, an estimated 17,500 children were trafficking victims in the United States, and in 2013, 100,000 were identified to have been sexually exploited. So, what are the causes and contributing factors? Many factors play a major role in the contributing causes of commercially sexually exploited children. Examination of childhood adversities linked to victimization in human trafficking indicates that sexual abuse is the most damaging type of child maltreatment that creates susceptibility to exploitation among both boys and girls. That's another misconception that our society holds, is that girls are the only victims, when in fact, there is a large number of boys who are victims as well. Strong forms of childhood trauma, examples being sexual abuse, neglect, conflict between caregivers, poverty, divorce, physical abuse, emotional abuse, drug use, homelessness, and violence, function as a gateway trauma that initiates increased exposure to other forms of victimization. These early traumas are known as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. These forms of maltreatment and neglect result in a lack of caregiver protection, increasing the likelihood that children will seek affection and support outside their family. Furthermore, according to research on the victim selection patterns of sex offenders and sex traffickers, these perpetrators seek out children who are neglected and in need of help. It's also important to highlight that children who become part of the foster care system and who also identify as LGBTQ run a higher risk of homelessness and also being victims of childhood sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. So, what are the causes and contributing factors? And this is continued. Technology plays a huge role in the increase of child sexual trafficking. Internet child pornography is an example of transnational crime. Internet child pornography is increasing, and such words as PTHC, which stands for preteen hardcore, Lolita, teen, and 12YO, which stands for 12-year-old, are routinely found in the top 1,000 terms used in international search engines. Online tourism, social networks create environments that gather groups of people with common interests. And these groups of people carry out activities such as child sex exploitation through web-based content such as text, images, videos, audios, and live streaming. It is concluded that the flow of child pornography represents a physical and psychological violation of minors, especially when the new generation has increasingly more contact with technology and different web-based network and applications. Here's a statistic for you. 1 in 5 children with internet access has received at least one sexual proposal. Conflict theory in crime. Conflict theories of crime suggest that deviance is inevitable whenever two groups having different degrees of power. In addition, the more inequality there is in a society, the greater the crime rate in that society. In the case of commercially sexually exploited children, exploiters are able to resell the children over and over again, making sex trafficking a multi-billion-dollar industry. And when I write that, I want you to think about when, say, a drug dealer is selling a specific drug. So we'll use cocaine as an example. When the drug dealer sells a bag of cocaine, that cocaine is gone and it can no longer produce more revenue for the drug dealer. Now, when we use children and we talk about the sexual exploitation of children, children can be reused and resold over and over again. And so that makes it a more lucrative business for the pimps and exploiters. Next, an often overlooked connection exists between gendered access to resources, property, employment, income, and gender-based violence, as intersectional vulnerabilities faced by many women stem from matrices of domination created by the economic policies of the modern world system, which can also be tied in with the conflict theory. The consequences of sex trafficking. Youth who have been victims of sex trafficking have a wide range of both short and long-term needs and care, likely to encounter a number of public systems of care, including social services, law enforcement, healthcare, and education. Their experiences of trafficking, in addition to previous experiences of exploitation or abuse, like discussed earlier, ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, may necessitate physical or mental health treatment, as well as legal advocacy and life skill development. Youth who have been victimized may struggle with a range of emotional, social, and developmental difficulties, and may not identify themselves as victims at all. Children with complex trauma maintain a chronic state of vigilance and perceive adults as sources of threat rather than of comfort or support. These children may also experience difficulties in a range of domains, including attachment, behavioral self-control, self-concept, and emotional regulation, substance use, running away, incarceration, hospitalization, self-harming behaviors, and homelessness. Furthermore, the sex trafficking of our children creates an increase in STD and HIV transmittal in teen pregnancy. When these children become adults, they will then fall victim to an increased chance of poverty, homelessness, discrimination, drug abuse, incarceration, and some will become predators themselves, and the cycle will continue. And I can also give the example of a youth that I once worked with in wraparound who was a victim of human sex trafficking and forced into sex slavery. And I found an article in a newspaper of the same teen who was arrested in Ventura for being the exploiter herself. So, in the lifestyle of human sex trafficking, children who have been exploited can sometimes adopt the lifestyle and become what is termed a bottom bitch, and they become the exploiters themselves. So in the case of this youth that I worked with, she, as an adult, legally at the age of 18, was arrested for the exploitation of a minor who was 16. So who actually benefits from this problem? And these are just the ones that I could physically come up with on my own, right? So the list includes exploiters. Of course, they make monetary gains from selling and exploiting children. They're also known as pimps. The pedophiles themselves who purchase, obtain, and take uh, the sex acts from children and the images of sex acts on children and sell them over the internet. Gangs, internet-based networks, Backpages, Facebook, Omegle, etc., they all profit from the consumption and the selling of child pornography and child sex trafficking. The film and music industry. There's a lot of films and music that glorify and highlight that if you want to get somewhere in life, then you use your sexuality and sell it. Or there's songs out there that glorify being a pimp. So core countries such as the United States have created economic and trade policies which encourage exploitable labor and demands for sex trafficking within the United States to serve new destination males. So selling our children to men who come in on business trades or for NFL events all participate in the consumption of the sex trafficking of minors. Travel and destination providers, they make monetary gains. Strip clubs, bar owners, hotel and motel owners, and even politicians. So when I say politicians, I'm saying that when politicians use their platform to say that they want to increase public knowledge on the sexual exploitation of children for votes, right? They are re-exploiting children. So all gain monetary, political, economic, and status gain from commercially sexually exploited children. I think it's kind of hard to not be able to find some sector of our society that actually benefits in some way, shape, or form from the sexual exploitation of children. So who has the ability to address and influence the problem? Federal, state, and local legislation and policies. Since 2014, the California legislature has been investigating in the child welfare system's capacity to identify and serve commercially sexually exploited children while simultaneously shifting away from criminalization. So in that, youth who were under the age of 18 prior to 2017 were detained, arrested, and convicted in the juvenile justice system as child prostitutes. So our legislators have moved away from the criminalization. So in 2014, through the budget process, California passed SB 855, which first clarified that CSEC, including those who trade sex to meet their basic needs, may be served by child welfare, and two, created the CSEC program funding participating counties to develop multidisciplinary CSEC responses. In 2015, California codified the Federal Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act through SB 794, which requires all county child welfare and probation agencies to create protocols to identify, report, document, and serve CSEC and at-risk children. Also, in this act, um, county social services like DPSS and CPS also are able to arrest and prosecute parents of children who have been victims of commercial sex trafficking, in the sense that in repeat neglect of protecting their children, when parents are aware that their children are being sold by pimps and exploiters and they failed to protect these children, now the state is going after the parents who are unable to protect their children properly. So moving forward, beginning January 1st, 2017, SB 1322 prohibited the arrest of minors for prostitution or loitering with intent to commit prostitution. That means California has taken a final definitive step towards clarifying exploited children are child abuse, who are in fact child abuse victims, not criminals. So I also want to highlight on this because I work in the field of treating commercially sexually exploited children. And what ended up happening with the passing of the SB 1322 is that when a child is found to be possibly engaging in sex acts for money, police officers can no longer detain these minors. And so what is happening is that it's making it harder for law enforcement to, one, remove them out of the situation that they're in, and two, being able to communicate with these youth about who is exploiting them. So now there's a huger gap between getting the information needed to locate and prosecute the exploiters. So that has been the downside of the passing of the SB 1322. Now, the good side is that these youth are no longer being seen as criminals, deviants, and are no longer receiving criminal prosecution for being victims. So this problem is highly underrepresented by media, news, and government when we need a strong clarifying explanation when the problem is framed for the public. So what I mean by this is that, yeah, sometimes we'll hear about huge sex trafficking rings that have been busted in different states around our nation, but we don't really hear about the smaller cases, the ones that happen right here in our neighborhoods. You know, the problem with human sex trafficking of minors is that it's not discriminatory. Every child is at risk of exploiters. Every single child, regardless of age, creed, religion, race, like they are all at risk. And so I think that the media and our government need to put a bigger clarifying explanation to this, so that way all parents can become aware of this issue. Who should do something about the problem? I think everyone has the ability to change this increasing social problem. We as individuals can choose to educate ourselves on the realities and the frequency of child sex trafficking. When we choose to acknowledge the societal structures that perpetuate modern-day slavery, we can become agents of change. Local, state, and federal governments have the ability to change laws and policies that better protect the rights of children and increase the punitive measures on those convicted of the sexual exploitation of children. Social services, mental health services, educational institutions, and stakeholders can increase appropriate services, programs, and public educational programs that could reduce the exploitation of children. Public awareness and education is key. So I'm encouraging everybody to quit turning a blind eye to something that is happening right next door to us. So here are 3 solutions. Peer supports. The use of survivors in the engagement and treatment of CSEC youth is crucial. Unless you have lived sexual exploitation, you can't truly understand what the victim is feeling physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Our society is so prone to using people's past to determine their future. This creates the inability for true rehabilitation and the use of survivors in the clinical setting. The opportunity for survivors to utilize their experiences as a positive job trade in social services and mental health would positively reduce long-term effects of exploitation, thus reducing the cycle. Early intervention. In order to stop sexual exploitation before it happens, we as a society must stop ignoring institutional poverty, racism, trauma, and mass incarceration. Stop being a society that focuses and glorifies sexism, gender, beauty, capitalism, and money. Our children's self-esteem and self-worth needs to be nurtured, and parents should be required to participate in parenting classes that teach these nurturing skills when expecting a child. Trauma-informed care and penalties. All service providers, legislators, any workers from public service sectors must be trained in the prevention and identification of not just victims but exploiters. The sexual exploitation of children must carry mandatory sentences that are weighed and convicted like murder crimes. All states need zero-tolerance laws and policies against exploiters and buyers of sex trafficking victims. So thank you. That concludes my my project and my slides. Here are my references. So if you want to further investigate where I located my information and obtained my sources, I was unable to figure out how to hang these references as they should be according to APA formatting, but I thank you for your time and God bless.